In the winter of 1919, a photograph was taken that would become one of the most disturbing and fascinating documents in human history. It shows a man sitting at a dinner table, fork in hand, smiling broadly at the camera. But look closer at that photograph, and you'll notice something that will make your blood run cold. The man's left hand is missing 3 fingers. And on his plate, partially consumed, are what appear to be human digits. This is the true story of Mikhail Petrovich, a Russian aristocrat who survived 127 days in complete isolation during one of the harshest winters in Siberian history, by doing the unthinkable. The year was 1919, and the Russian Revolution had torn the country apart. Mikhail Petrovich was a wealthy landowner who owned vast estates in the Ural Mountains. When the Bolsheviks came for him, he fled into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on his back and a small satchel containing a few personal items. He thought he could wait out the political storm in a hunting cabin he had used years before. He was wrong. The cabin was barely standing when he found it. The roof had partially collapsed, and wild animals had made it their home. But it was shelter, and in the brutal Siberian winter, shelter meant life. What Mikhail didn't know was that this winter would be one of the most severe on record. Temperatures would drop to -50 degrees Celsius, and snow would fall continuously for weeks at a time. For the first month, Mikhail survived on the meager supplies he found in the cabin, and whatever small game he could catch. He had been an avid hunter in his youth, but desperation made him resourceful in ways he never imagined. He ate tree bark, roots, and even leather from old boots he found. But as the weeks turned into months, and the snow continued to fall, his options became increasingly limited. By day 60, Mikhail had eaten everything remotely edible in a 5-mile radius around the cabin. The wildlife had either migrated or died, and the snow was too deep for him to venture further. His body had already begun consuming itself, his once robust frame now skeletal. But Mikhail Petrovich was a man who refused to surrender to death. It was on day 73 that Mikhail made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Looking at his hands, he realized they were the only source of protein left available to him. The thought had crossed his mind weeks earlier, but he had pushed it away as the ravings of a starving mind. Now, faced with certain death, it seemed less like madness and more like survival. The process was methodical. Mikhail had found a rusty saw in the cabin's storage area. He heated it over the fire to sterilize it as best he could. He chose his left pinky finger first, reasoning that it would be the least debilitating loss. The pain was excruciating, beyond anything he had ever experienced. He bit down on a piece of leather to keep from screaming, knowing that the sound might attract wolves or bears. But something remarkable happened after he consumed that first finger. The protein and nutrients gave him strength he hadn't felt in weeks. His mind became clearer, his body more resilient. It was as if he had discovered a terrible secret about human survival that no one else knew. The psychological barrier had been broken, and Mikhail began to see his own body, not as a temple, but as a resource to be managed. Over the following weeks, Mikhail developed what he called his rationing system. He would consume 1 finger every 12 to 14 days, always choosing the digit that would least impact his ability to perform essential survival tasks. He became an expert at cauterizing wounds using heated metal and treating infections. With pine resin and alcohol, he distilled from fermented organic matter. The most disturbing aspect of Mikhail's survival strategy wasn't the cannibalism itself, but how he mentally adapted to it. He began treating each amputation like a harvest, carefully planning which finger to take next based on his projected survival needs. He kept detailed notes in a journal, documenting not just the physical process, but his psychological state throughout the ordeal. Day 87, one entry reads, "Took the ring finger today. The cut was cleaner than last time. I'm getting better at this. Strange how the mind adapts. I no longer feel revulsion, only gratitude for the sustenance. The body wants to live, even if it means consuming itself piece by piece." By day 100, Mikhail had consumed 5 fingers and part of his left thumb, but his strategy was working. While his extremities were gone, his core body remained strong enough to function. He had learned to start fires with his remaining digits to maintain his shelter and to collect snow for water. He had become the ultimate survivor, albeit at a cost that most would consider unthinkable. The psychological transformation was perhaps even more remarkable than the physical one. Mikhail began to see his situation not as a tragedy, but as a profound experiment in human endurance. He started to believe that he was discovering something fundamental about the human condition, about the lengths to which the survival instinct could push a person "I am becoming something new," he wrote on day 103. "Not quite human anymore, but not yet dead. I exist in a space between life and death that few have ever explored. Each finger I sacrifice brings me closer to understanding what it truly means to want to live." The photograph that would later shock the world was taken on day 119. Mikhail had found an old camera in the cabin, a relic from his previous hunting trips. He had been documenting his transformation throughout the ordeal, but this particular photo was different. He set up the camera with a timer mechanism, arranged his final finger meal on a plate, and posed as if he were at a dinner party in his former life. The smile on his face in that photograph is what disturbs people most. It's not the forced grimace of a man in agony, but the genuine expression of someone who has found peace with their situation. Mikhail later explained that by that point, he had transcended normal human psychology. He had entered a mental state where the act of self-consumption had become not just survival, but a form of communion with his own mortality. The rescue came on day 127, when a Soviet patrol, finally, reached the remote cabin. The soldiers who found Mikhail couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here was a man who should have been dead months ago, not only alive but mentally coherent. His first words to his rescuers were not pleas for help or expressions of relief, but a calm inquiry about whether they would like to see his journal documenting the experience. The Soviet authorities initially wanted to suppress Mikhail's story, considering it too disturbing for public consumption, but Mikhail had become obsessed with sharing his experience. He believed that his survival method represented a breakthrough in human endurance that could benefit others in extreme situations. He spent months trying to convince military leaders and scientists to study his techniques. The medical examination of Mikhail revealed something extraordinary. Despite having consumed approximately 20% of his extremities, his vital organs were in remarkably good condition. The protein from his own flesh had provided just enough nutrition to keep his core systems functioning. More importantly, his mental state remained stable. He showed no signs of the psychological breakdown that doctors expected from someone who had experienced such trauma. Mikhail's case caught the attention of early psychologists studying extreme survival situations. They were fascinated by his ability to compartmentalize the horror of his actions and focus purely on the practical aspects of staying alive. He had somehow managed to override millions of years of evolutionary programming that made humans recoil from consuming their own flesh. But the most disturbing discovery came when researchers realized that Mikhail had not just survived his ordeal, he had thrived psychologically. He reported feeling more mentally clear and spiritually connected than he ever had in his previous life of luxury. He claimed that the experience had stripped away all the superficial concerns that had previously dominated his thoughts, leaving him with a pure understanding of what it meant to be alive. The photograph of Mikhail eating his own finger became legendary in underground circles. It was passed from person to person, like a forbidden relic, whispered about in medical schools and psychology departments. Some viewed it as the ultimate document of human resilience, while others saw it as evidence of how quickly civilization could crumble when faced with extreme circumstances. Mikhail spent the rest of his life trying to convince others that his survival method was not an act of desperation, but a rational response to an impossible situation. He argued that society's revulsion at auto-cannibalism was simply conditioning, and that in truly extreme circumstances, such taboos became meaningless. He believed that everyone possessed the capacity for such extreme adaptation, but that social programming prevented them from accessing it. The scientific community was divided on how to interpret Mikhail's case. Some researchers saw it as valuable data about human survival capabilities under extreme stress. Others argued that his psychological adaptation was actually a form of trauma-induced dissociation that allowed him to disconnect from the horror of his actions. The debate continues to this day among specialists in extreme psychology and survival medicine. What makes Mikhail's story so compelling is not just the shocking nature of his survival method, but the way he mentally processed the experience. He never expressed regret or shame about what he had done. Instead, he viewed it as a profound learning experience that had taught him something fundamental about human nature. He claimed that most people lived their entire lives without ever discovering what they were truly capable of when faced with extinction. The long-term effects of Mikhail's ordeal were complex. Physically, he adapted remarkably well to life with diminished manual dexterity. He learned to write with his remaining fingers and developed techniques for performing daily tasks that most people couldn't imagine managing. But the psychological impact was more profound. He reported that normal social interactions felt shallow and meaningless after his experience of ultimate self-reliance. Mikhail became obsessed with the idea that modern society had made people soft and unprepared for real survival situations. He spent years developing training programs that he believed could help others access their deepest survival instincts. His methods were considered too extreme and dangerous by mainstream educators, but he attracted a small following of individuals interested in pushing human endurance to its limits. The photograph remained Mikhail's most powerful tool for communicating his message. He would show it to audiences and explain that the smile on his face represented the moment he truly understood what it meant to choose life over death. He argued that most people never faced such a clear choice, and therefore never discovered the strength that lay dormant within them. As years passed, Mikhail's story took on mythical qualities. Some claimed he had exaggerated the details for dramatic effect. Others suggested that the photograph was staged or manipulated. But medical records from his rescue confirmed the physical evidence of his ordeal, and his detailed journal entries provided a psychological roadmap of his transformation that was too consistent and complex to have been fabricated. The debate over Mikhail's legacy continues to divide experts in survival psychology. Some view him as an inspiration, a man who refused to surrender to impossible circumstances and found a way to survive through pure willpower and rational thinking. Others see his story as a cautionary tale about how extreme situations can push human psychology beyond recognizable limits, creating individuals who are technically alive but fundamentally changed in ways that separate them from normal human experience. What cannot be disputed is the profound impact that Mikhail's survival method had on early research into extreme psychology and survival medicine. His case became a reference point for understanding how humans adapt to unthinkable circumstances, and his detailed documentation of the physical and mental processes involved provided valuable data for researchers studying survival under extreme conditions. The photograph of Mikhail smiling while consuming his own finger remains one of the most powerful and disturbing images in the historical record of human survival. It captures a moment that represents the absolute extreme of human adaptability, a point where the will to live overrides every instinct and social conditioning that defines normal human behavior. For Mikhail himself, the photograph represented something different. He saw it as documentation of his greatest achievement, not just surviving, but maintaining his humanity and dignity even while doing something that most would consider inhuman. He believed that his smile in that moment was evidence that he had transcended the limitations that normally define human existence. The story of Mikhail Petrovich challenges every assumption about human nature and survival. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about what we would do in truly desperate circumstances, and whether our revulsion at certain acts is based on moral principles or simply social conditioning. His case remains one of the most extreme examples of human survival ever documented, a testament to the terrifying power of the human will to live. Today, nearly a century later, Mikhail's story continues to fascinate and disturb in equal measure. The photograph of him smiling while consuming his own flesh serves as a reminder that human beings are capable of adaptation beyond our wildest imagination when faced with extinction. It stands as perhaps the most extreme example of the lengths to which the survival instinct can push human behavior, and a chilling glimpse into the depths of human resilience when all other options have been exhausted. The man who devoured his own fingers and smiled for the camera had discovered something that most people never will: the exact point where the desire to live becomes stronger than every other human instinct, including self-preservation in its traditional sense. His story remains a haunting testament to the power of human will and the terrible beauty of survival at any cost.